The rain didn't start as a storm. It started as that thin, mean drizzle that soaks your sweater slowly, like the sky is taking its time deciding how badly it wants to ruin you. Claire Shaw stood at the edge of the master study, fingers curled around the spine of a paperback she hadn't read in weeks. She used to read every night. She used to believe in quiet routines, the kind that keep a marriage stitched together when everything else is pulling apart. But the room didn't feel like a marriage anymore. It felt like a courtroom disguised as luxury. The study was Brandon's favorite room in the entire house. Not because it was comfortable. Nothing in Brandon's world needed to be comfortable. But because it looked like the version of himself he wanted strangers to believe. A wall of glass stared out over the lights of Marin County, the hillside dropping away into a dark quilt of trees and expensive silence. The shelves were curated, not filled, curated. First editions he didn't understand. Awards he didn't win alone. Framed magazine covers with his face angled just right. And Brandon Shaw, 41, CEO of Shaw Advanced Dynamics, the visionary everyone toasted at galas, stood by the fireplace with a drink he hadn't earned the taste for. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching his reflection in the black glass of the framed TV above the mantel, adjusting his cuff like the world might be filming him at any moment. "Claire," he said finally, voice even, like he was announcing a stock split. She didn't move. "Yes," his jaw tightened. That was the first crack in his performance. He hated when she sounded calm. Calm made him feel like he wasn't in control. "I'm done," he said. 2 words, clean, surgical. Claire felt them land in her chest anyway. Not as pain. She'd already been living beside this distance for months. But as confirmation. Confirmation that the man in front of her had been rehearsing this. "Done with what?" she asked, as if she didn't already know. Brandon turned then, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It wasn't guilt either. It was impatience. "Don't do that," he said. "Don't make this dramatic. I'm trying to be respectful." Respectful. Claire almost laughed. The word didn't fit in his mouth anymore. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He didn't hold it like something sacred. He held it like something annoying he wanted off his hands. He tossed it onto the leather chair across from her. The envelope landed with a soft slap. Divorce papers have a sound. Not loud, not violent, but final. Claire stared at it for a second, then at him. "You already filed," she said quietly. "Yes." Brandon took a sip of his drink. "My attorney handled it. You'll have yours. We'll keep it civil, civil." Like he was dissolving a business partnership. Like her heart was a line item. She stepped forward, the paperback still in her hands, and sat down, slowly, on the edge of the chair. The envelope stared up at her like an accusation. "I thought you said you wanted to work on us," she said. Brandon let out a short laugh. "You can't work on 2 people going in opposite directions." "And we're going in opposite directions," she repeated, trying to understand the way he'd chosen this exact moment, this exact night. He gestured around the room. "Look at everything I've built." There it was. Not we. Not our home. "Everything I've built." Claire lifted her eyes. "I built some of it too." Brandon's expression sharpened. "How?" The word was a challenge. "A trap." Claire swallowed, remembering years that didn't look like this room at all. A 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland with broken blinds. Brandon hunched over a laptop, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking, telling her he'd make it one day. Her making soup he barely tasted. Her calling someone from a bathroom so Brandon wouldn't hear her voice. Her signing documents she didn't fully explain because he'd begged her not to make him feel small. She looked at him now, the billionaire costume perfect, and said, "I believed in you." Brandon waved it off. Belief doesn't pay invoices. He crossed the room like he was pacing a stage. "You want the honest truth. I've outgrown this. I've outgrown the smallness." Claire's fingers tightened around the book. "My smallness," Brandon didn't deny it. "You're a good person, Claire. You're kind. You make bread and you donate to shelters, and you pretend we're still the couple from before." His voice dripped with condescension. "But I'm not that guy anymore," he said. "The world is bigger now, and I need someone who fits it." Claire felt a chill run through her, because she knew what someone meant. Not a concept, a person. There were rumors. There always are when a CEO starts staying late at the office with a woman half his age. But rumors are easy to ignore when you're married to someone. you once trusted with your whole life. Claire set the book on the chair beside her and finally touched the envelope. Her thumb slid under the flap, but she didn't open it yet. "What's her name?" she asked. Brandon paused, just for a beat. Then he said it like it didn't matter. "Tessa." Claire exhaled. So it wasn't just a fantasy, not just gossip, a real name. Brandon lifted his chin. "Tessa Lane understands my world. She understands branding. She understands growth. She understands money," Claire said. He smirked. "And you understand what, dusty bookshops?" Claire studied him. And for a moment she saw the little boy hiding inside this man. The boy who'd promised himself he'd never be powerless again. The boy who would burn anything that reminded him of who he used to be, including, "I'm not going to fight you," Claire said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. Brandon blinked. He'd expected tears, screaming, begging, anything that would prove he still mattered. "Good," he said, relief making him bold. "Then this will be quick." Claire nodded once. "Quick is fine." Brandon walked behind his desk again, opened another drawer and placed something on top, an already signed check. He slid it across the polished surface like a dealer offering a final card. "There's a settlement," he said. 200,000. "And I'm letting you keep the cottage in Ohio your aunt left you." Claire didn't look at the check. "You're letting me keep what's already mine." Brandon's smile thinned. "Don't do that, don't get righteous. You lived well here, you had every comfort." "I had a husband," Claire said. "Or I thought I did." Brandon's gaze hardened again, like softness was embarrassing. "You had access to my life, to my name, to my network." Claire's stomach turned. He didn't understand love anymore. He understood ownership. She finally opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the first page. The words blurred for a second. Not because she couldn't read them, but because it still hit like a cold slap to see legal language define 10 years of her life. Irreconcilable differences, division of property, spousal support waived per prenup. Claire's throat tightened. "You're invoking the prenup." "Of course I am," Brandon said. "That's why it exists." Claire looked up. "Do you remember the night you made me sign it?" Brandon shrugged. "We were being smart." "You were terrified," Claire corrected softly. "You said you'd never let anyone take your future away." Brandon's eyes flickered. He remembered. He just didn't want to feel it. "You signed," he said coldly. "That's what matters." Claire closed the envelope again, careful, gentle, like it might cut her fingers. "Okay," she said. Brandon straightened, satisfied. "Okay." He checked his watch. "I need you out by tonight." Claire blinked. "Tonight?" "Yes," he said it like it was obvious. "I have people coming, investors. Tessa will be here." Claire stared at him, disbelief turning into a slow, dangerous clarity. "You're bringing her here," she said. "It's my house," Brandon replied. "And I don't want confusion. I want a clean break." Claire stood, the envelope in her hands. "This is still my home," she said quietly. Brandon's laugh was sharp. "No, Claire, this is my home. You're a guest now." She felt something inside her settle. Not break, settle, like a lock clicking into place. "Be careful," Claire said, voice low. Brandon rolled his eyes. "Here we go." The mysterious warning. "Claire, I'm not in the mood for your little fortune cookie speeches." "It's not a speech," she said. "It's a fact. You should be careful with what you do next." Brandon walked toward her, closing the distance until she could smell the expensive cologne he wore like armor. "You're leaving," he said. "Pack what you came with. Don't touch anything else." Claire met his gaze. "You want me to take only what I came with?" "Yes," Claire nodded slowly. "Fine." Brandon stepped back as if the conversation was done. And maybe for him it was. Because Brandon Shaw didn't understand that some endings don't look like tears. Some endings look like silence. Claire walked out of the study, her footsteps soft on the hallway runner. The house was enormous. Brandon had called it the Crown. 14,000 square feet of stone and glass perched above the bay. A mansion that seemed to float over the lights of the city like it owned them. It wasn't always like this. There had been a smaller home, a rented condo, a townhouse. But Brandon's hunger had grown the way wildfires grow, fast, hot, and indifferent to what they destroy. Claire entered the master bedroom, where her closet was a tidy strip beside Brandon's museum of suits. She pulled down an old suitcase from the top shelf. Not a designer suitcase, not a shiny one. A scuffed leather case with a torn corner. The one she'd carried when she first moved in with him. Her hands moved methodically, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she'd learned something about surviving Brandon's moods. If you fell apart, he'd call you weak. If you stayed calm, he'd call you cold. There was no version of her that he would respect, because respect required seeing her as human, not a supporting character. She packed her sweaters, her jeans, a few books. She left the jewelry. She left the watches he'd gifted her after he made his first million. As if money could erase the night she'd held him while he shook with fear, she packed one wooden box. Her grandmother's, inside, letters, a worn photograph, and a silver key on her wrist. Claire's fingers brushed the key, and for a moment her breath caught. Because that key wasn't sentimental, it was functional. Downstairs she heard the front door open. Laughter, high and bright, heels clicking on marble. Claire froze, listening. Then she heard Brandon's voice change. Not the impatient CEO voice, the charming voice. The voice he used when he wanted someone to adore him. "Baby, you made it," he said. Claire closed her suitcase and zipped it with a quiet finality. She walked to the top of the staircase. Below, in the foyer, Brandon stood with a woman draped against his arm like she belonged there. Tessa Lane was exactly what Claire had expected. 26, maybe 27. Glossy hair, sculpted face, a red dress that didn't care about weather. The kind of beauty that looked expensive because it required constant maintenance. Tessa tossed her hair back and glanced around the foyer. "This place is insane," she said. "It's like a movie set." Brandon laughed. "It's our life." Our. Claire's grip tightened on the suitcase hand. Tessa turned then, her eyes lifting up the stairs and landing on Claire, and the expression on Tessa's face was not shame. It was victory. "Oh," Tessa said, feigning surprise. "She's still here." Brandon followed her gaze and looked up. His face tightened. Claire walked down slowly, each step controlled. Not because she wanted to perform dignity, but because she refused to run from her own home like a thief. Tessa smiled, lips glossy. "Hi, I'm Tessa." Claire stopped at the bottom step. "I know." Tessa's smile widened. "I've heard a lot about you." Claire didn't blink. "Then you already know manners." Brandon's eyes flashed. Claire held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "It's okay, you invited her. You wanted this." Tessa leaned closer into Brandon, her hand sliding up his arm. "Honestly, Brandon, I thought she'd be louder." Claire's voice stayed calm. "Some people don't need to be loud to be heard." Brandon exhaled, annoyed. "I told you to pack and go." "I did," Claire said, lifting the suitcase slightly. "I'm leaving." Tessa tilted her head. "Good. Because I'm soaking wet and I don't want awkward energy." Brandon looked relieved, like he'd avoided a scene. Then he reached for Claire's suitcase. "I'll handle that," he said, and before she could react, he yanked it from her hand. Claire's fingers released the handle. She didn't fight him, because she wanted him to do exactly what he was about to do. Brandon marched to the front door, threw it open, and a gust of cold rain blew into the foyer. He didn't hesitate. He hurled the suitcase out onto the stone steps. It landed hard, the leather darkening as rain splattered it instantly. Claire stared at it, then back at Brandon. The moment hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. Tessa giggled, one manicured hand covering her mouth. "Oh my God," Brandon pointed to the open doorway. "Out," he snapped. "Now." Claire's pulse stayed steady, not because she wasn't devastated, but because something in her had crossed a line and couldn't uncross it. She stepped toward the doorway, the wind whipping her hair across her cheek. Brandon watched her like he expected her to collapse at the threshold. Instead, Claire paused just inside the door, turned back and looked at him. Really looked at him. At the arrogance, at the certainty, at the way he'd convinced himself he was untouchable. "I hope you enjoy it," she said quietly. Brandon scoffed. "Enjoy what?" Claire's gaze moved past him, up the sweeping staircase, to the chandelier, to the walls he'd treated like proof of his greatness. "This house," she said, "while it lasts." Tessa rolled her eyes. "Drama." Brandon stepped forward, jaw tight. "Get out, Claire." Claire nodded once, then stepped into the rain. The cold hit her instantly, soaking through her sweater like it had been waiting. She didn't run. She walked to her suitcase, lifted it, and moved beneath the edge of the portico where she was still getting wet, but less. Behind her, the double doors shut. A deadbolt clicked, a sound that said, "You are not welcome." Claire set her suitcase down carefully, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over a contact she hadn't used in years. She'd promised herself she'd never need it, that she could live as Claire Shaw. Ordinary wife, ordinary life, and never dragged the past into her marriage. But Brandon had already dragged everything into the open. He'd just done it without realizing whose world he was standing in. The phone rang twice. A man answered on the third ring, voice calm and crisp like tailored fabric. "Whitaker office," he said. "This is Grant." Claire closed her eyes briefly, letting the rain tap her lashes. "Grant," she said softly. "It's Claire." Silence, then controlled shock. "Caldwell," Grant said, using the name Brandon had never spoken aloud. "Is something wrong?" Claire opened her eyes and stared into the night. "Yes," she said. "It's time." The rain seemed to hush as if the world leaned in. Grant's voice low. "Do you want the protocol initiated?" Claire swallowed once. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was correction. "Yes," she said. "Initiate it. And call the board, understood." Grant said, "No hesitation now." "Where are you?" Claire glanced back at the mansion's locked doors. "Outside," she said. "In the rain." A beat of silence then. "A car will be there in 10 minutes. Claire nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you, Miss Caldwell," Grant added gently. "Are you safe?" Claire looked down at her suitcase, at the water dripping off her fingers. Then she looked back up, toward the house that thought it had erased her. "Yes," she said, "I'm safe." She ended the call. And for the first time that night her hands shook. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that Brandon had made the kind of mistake that only arrogant people make. He'd assumed the quiet person in the room was powerless. Headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway, cutting through the curtain of rain. Not a rideshare, not a cab, a black sedan, long and low, moving like it belonged on a private runway. It rolled to a stop under the portico. A driver stepped out in a dark coat, opened the rear door, and stood perfectly still, unbothered by the storm. Claire lifted her suitcase. Before she got in, she turned and looked at the mansion one last time. Through the tall foyer window, she could see Brandon and Tessa, two silhouettes moving under golden light. They raised glasses. They toasted. Claire's mouth didn't smile. Her eyes didn't soften. She whispered more to herself than to anyone else. "You're celebrating too early." She stepped into the car. Warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. The driver closed the door, and the sedan glided away from the house that Brandon believed he owned. Inside, Claire leaned back, water dripping from her hair onto the leather seat. Her phone buzzed with a new message. From Grant. 2 words confirmed. "Executing." Claire stared at the screen. Then she locked her phone, exhaled slowly, and let the calm settle again. Because the next morning, Brandon wasn't going to wake up as a king. He was going to wake up as a tenant. And tenants don't get to throw owners out. Comments, and don't forget to tell us, where are you watching from? The rain finally stopped around dawn. By the time the first strip of gray slid over the Marin Hills, the storm had rinsed the glass walls of the Shaw estate so clean that the house glowed against the wet hillside, all chrome and angles and money. Brandon Shaw woke to that glow. He stretched across the wide, cold half of his bed and didn't find Claire. For a moment, his hand patted the empty space, confused. Then memory snapped into place and a slow, smug smile tugged at his mouth. Right, that chapter was over. He lay there for a second, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of Claire standing in the rain with her suitcase, her sweater clinging to her shoulders, her face unreadable. The part of him that used to panic at the thought of being alone with his own conscience flickered. He smothered it. He'd done what he needed to do. "Brandon," a sleepy voice murmured beside him, "what time is it?" Tessa rolled over, her hair a messy halo on the silk pillowcase Claire used to press and smooth. Her mascara had smudged just enough to look intentional. "It's early," he said, softening his tone for her. "Go back to sleep," she pouted playfully. "I hate mornings." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, the gesture automatic. Then he climbed out of bed, tightening the belt on his robe as he walked toward the balcony doors. He pulled them open and stepped out into the cool morning air. The estate spread below him. Terraced lawn, infinity pool spilling into the horizon, tennis courts, guest house. The bay beyond slick as metal under the low sky. His, all his. He took a breath that tasted like victory. This is what he'd promised himself as a kid in a rented duplex in Fresno. Listening to his mom argue with landlords about broken heaters and late fees. One day, he'd own something no one could take away. He went back inside, grabbed his phone, and glanced at the time. 7:42 a.m. by now. The house should have been humming. Housekeeper in the kitchen, Grounds crew on the lawn, security doing exterior rounds, the private chef prepping breakfast, but the air was still, too still. Brandon frowned and headed downstairs. The staircase curved around the foyer in a grand sweep, the chandelier's crystals catching the early light. He passed the spot where Claire had stood the night before, suitcase at her side, rain blowing in from the open door. He pushed the thought away and walked into the kitchen. He stopped. The island, usually lined with cut fruit, pastries, and neatly arranged supplements, was bare. No clink of dishes, no low hum of conversation, no smell of coffee. "Hello," he called. Silence. He opened the built-in fridge. Half the usual items were gone. The chef's labeled containers. The fresh herbs, the expensive things. His jaw tightened. "Greta," he shouted, calling the housekeeper. Marco, nothing. He snatched his phone from his pocket and typed a quick group text to the household staff. "Where is everyone?" The message showed as delivered. No one replied. He stood for another moment, irritation rising. Then he shrugged. They'd probably misunderstood something about the schedule. He'd fix it later with HR. Staff were replaceable. He poured himself an espresso from the machine and walked back into the hallway. On the console table, where Claire had dropped her house keys last night, a single white envelope sat upright as if it had been placed with intention. Not tossed. Placed. Brandon's irritation sharpened into suspicion. He set down the espresso, picked up the envelope, and turned it over. His name was printed on the front in clean black type. Mr. Brandon Shaw, no return address. He tore it open with his thumb, unfolding several pages clipped together. The paper was heavy, embossed with a seal he didn't recognize. He skimmed the heading. Notice of lease termination and reversion of improvements. His brain snagged on the legalese, then shoved past it. He read. By the second paragraph, his scalp was prickling. By the third, the blood drained from his face. Material breach. Grounds of moral misconduct on premises. Marital dissolution filed against primary beneficiary of Caldwell Family Trust. Ground lease for parcel 19B terminated effective immediately. All improvements, fixtures, and structures revert to lesser improvement. Fixture, structure. He looked up slowly, the words blurring. House, pool, tennis courts, everything bolted, nailed, or poured into the earth. What they, he muttered. He read the sender line. Whitaker Caldwell Land Holdings, LLC. His pulse kicked harder. He flipped to the last page, searching for a signature. Not a person, a firm, a generic legal sign-off. He crumpled the notice in his fist. A scam, he said aloud, convincing himself. Some mail fraud thing. Lease. I own this place. He grabbed his phone again and dialed his attorney. It rang and rang. Finally, a groggy voice answered. Yeah? Damien, it's Brandon. A pause. Then, more alert. Brandon? Morning. Everything okay? Everything is not okay, Brandon snapped. I got some garbage notice about a ground lease being terminated. From some Whitaker Caldwell outfit. This property is mine. There was another pause. Brandon could almost hear Damien sitting up in bed. Forward it, Damien said. Brandon scanned and sent the document from his phone, tossing the crumpled physical copy onto the console. He paced the foyer while he waited, the marble cold under his bare feet. Out of the corner of his eye, the paneled walls and soaring ceiling looked different, less solid, less permanent. His phone buzzed. Damien again. Brandon, his lawyer said, and there was something in his tone Brandon didn't like. I just pulled the county records and, Brandon demanded. Confirm it's bogus so I can go back to my morning. A beat. You don't own the land, Damien said carefully. Brandon laughed. A short, disbelieving burst. What are you talking about? I wired 8 figures to close this place. You paid for construction, permits, and improvements, Damien said. But the dirt under it. That was a 99-year ground lease. I have the recorded documents in front of me. I never signed that, Brandon said, heat rising. You did, Damien replied. Under Shaw Advanced Dynamics Holding Company. It's all there, Brandon swallowed. He had signed a lot of things back then. Hectic months, furious deals, late-night DocuSign marathons. Even if there is a lease, he argued, no one can just terminate it overnight. Not on a technicality. It's not a technicality, Damien said. There are morality and relationship clauses tied to the beneficiary of the Caldwell Trust. If you initiate divorce proceedings against that beneficiary, they can revoke that beneficiary Brandon repeated slowly. Who the hell is that beneficiary? And what do the Caldwells have to do with my land? Brandon, Damien said, sounding tired now. I think you need to sit down. I'm standing, Brandon snapped. Just tell me. The property isn't owned directly by Whitaker Caldwell on paper, Damien said. That's just the surface entity. But if you trace the ownership stack far enough, the controlling interest rolls up into the Caldwell family trust. Brandon stared at the staircase, the chandelier, his own reflection in the dark foyer mirror. I don't know any Caldwells, he said. Yes, Damien said quietly, you do. Brandon's grip tightened on the phone. What is that supposed to mean? Damien exhaled. Your wife's maiden name on the marriage license. Claire S. Shaw. You told me the S was for summer. Do you remember that? Brandon's mouth went dry. He remembered. They'd been at the clerk's office, hand in hand. She'd laughed when he joked about her middle initial. He had never asked what it actually stood for. It wasn't summer, was it? Damien went on. I pulled the full record. Claire Caldwell Shaw. She changed the order for privacy. For a second, the house tilted. Brandon caught himself on the edge of the console table. No, he whispered. No, that's not. The Caldwells own half of Northern California, Damien said. Ports, rail corridors, commercial blocks, land. Brandon saw flashes. Tiny details his brain had dismissed. The way some waitstaff treated Claire at certain restaurants with a deference they never showed him. The old man with the cane who'd hugged her at a charity gala and called her kiddo, then vanished before Brandon could get a card. The phone call she'd taken on the balcony at their old condo, speaking low, saying, I'm fine. I promise. I love him. I just need him to feel like he did this himself. His stomach dropped. You're telling me, he said slowly, that my wife, ex-wife, Damien corrected reflexively, that Claire, he pushed on, ignoring it, is the primary beneficiary in this clause, and because I filed for divorce, they can take everything? Not everything, Damien said. They can take the land and anything attached to it if it's defined as an improvement. The notice gives you 48 hours to vacate. 48 hours, Brandon barked. They can't do that. They can if the lease you signed says they can, Damien replied. You signed, Brandon. Your initials are on every page. They didn't trick you. You were just eager. Brandon's vision tunneled. His ears rang. He didn't remember the next few seconds clearly. He just knew that when the buzzing faded, Damien was still talking. Also need to discuss your personal accounts. What about my accounts? Brandon rasped. I attempted a test transfer just now, Damien said. Your primary accounts are frozen. So are several of your equity lines. My guess is the Caldwell side executed liens and asset freezes at the same time they filed corporate motions. Corporate motions? Brandon repeated. You should check your email, Damien said. And Brandon, what? You might want to be sitting down for that too. The call ended. Brandon stood in the foyer, phone limp in his hand. The notice crumpled at his feet. For the first time in years, silence in the house didn't feel like luxury. It felt like the air right before an earthquake. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the cheerful chime he'd selected from the home app. It was a long, insistent buzz, the kind of sound utility companies use when they're not asking for permission. He stalked to the door, unlocked it, and yanked it open. Two men stood on the doorstep. They weren't police. They wore dark suits and neutral expressions, the kind of men who spent their days serving papers and escorting people out of buildings they used to control. Mr. Shaw, the taller one asked. Yes, Brandon snapped. Who are you? Mr. Shaw. I'm here on behalf of Orion Corporate Recovery, the man said, showing a badge and a folded packet of documents. We've been retained by the majority shareholders of Shaw Advanced Dynamics. Majority shareholders? Brandon scoffed. I am the majority shareholder. The man consulted the top page of his packet. As of 6:15 this morning, controlling interest was consolidated under Caldwell Strategic Ventures, he said. You are no longer listed as majority. Brandon felt that like a kick. That's impossible, he said. You can't just, sir, the man interrupted, his tone still polite. I'm not here to debate. I'm here to execute. We have orders to secure company assets used as collateral on outstanding loans. He stepped aside and gestured. Down the driveway, a flatbed tow truck idled in front of the multi-car garage. Behind it, another vehicle with a logo for a data security firm. Brandon's heart lurched. My cars, he demanded. Those are personal. The Porsche, the Bentley, the black Tesla, and the armored SUV are all titled through corporate entities, the man said. They count as company assets. They will be taken into custody until outstanding obligations are satisfied. From the hallway behind him, Brandon heard footsteps. Babe, Tessa's voice floated over. What's going on? I heard a truck. She came into view, wearing his button-down shirt and nothing else, phone in hand, brows knitted in confusion. A notification pinged on her screen. She glanced down, then sucked in a breath. Oh my God, she said. You're trending. Trending, Brandon repeated numbly. She turned the screen toward him. A financial news alert? Caldwell Air seizes control of Shaw Advanced Dynamics. CEO removed in surprise pre-IPO shakeup below it. A thumbnail image. Claire, not in a cardigan, not in jeans. In a navy suit that fit like it had been tailored by a surgeon, hair pulled back, eyes cool as she stepped out of a black sedan into a glass tower, cameras flashing. The caption read, Claire Caldwell Shaw returns to family firm, takes over board. Husband ousted after personal matter, Brandon's throat closed. The corporate recovery agent glanced at the phone briefly, then looked back up at Brandon. We'll be as quick as we can, sir, he said. Brandon barreled past him, heading for the garage. The agent moved to block him. You can't interfere with the removal, he warned. Those are my cars, Brandon shouted. Tessa hovered in the doorway, filming on instinct, her content brain unable to stop itself. This is insane, she whispered to whatever audience might watch later. We're literally being robbed right now. The garage door groaned open. The bright yellow sports car he loved so much, the one he'd bought for himself after his Series C, gleamed under the lights. A crewman hooked its front wheels to the tow. No, Brandon lunged, grabbing for the chain. The recovery agent's hand clamped down on his arm, firm but not rough. Sir, he said, if you continue to obstruct, I will have to call local law enforcement. You're welcome to file appeals after we complete inventory. Brandon yanked his arm free, chest heaving. He turned back toward the front of the house. The digital panels along the driveway, normally set to display rotating art and slick welcome messages for guests, suddenly flickered. All at once, the images changed. They settled on a single live video feed. Brandon froze. Tessa lowered her phone. On every screen, Claire looked out at them. Not pixelated, not shaky. Crisp. Controlled. As if this had been planned for weeks. She sat at the head of a conference table, high above some downtown skyline, flanked by people in suits whose faces Brandon recognized from Forbes lists and boardroom war stories. The Caldwell board. A microphone sat in front of her. A slim gold pen lay parallel to a stack of documents at her right hand. Her eyes, framed by subtle makeup instead of the bare, tired look he'd gotten used to seeing at home, were clear. Calm. The house speakers came to life with a soft click. Then her voice poured into the damp air of the driveway. Good morning, Brandon. His name in her mouth sounded different, less like a plea, more like a verdict. Everyone on the driveway stilled. Even the tow guys paused, glancing at the screens. Tessa swallowed. What is this? Brandon stepped closer to the nearest panel, as if proximity could give him more control. Claire, he said, voice rough, what are you doing? Concluding business, she replied. Her tone was conversational, but there was steel threaded through every syllable. As you've probably noticed, she went on, the ground lease on parcel 19B has been terminated. The board voted unanimously this morning to enforce the reversion clause. The land and everything attached to it now revert to the Caldwell Trust. Brandon laughed, but it came out shaky. You told me last night, Claire said, overriding him without raising her voice. It's my house. Her gaze didn't soften. You signed the lease, she said. You failed the conditions. This was always the outcome. Tessa glanced between the screen and Brandon, eyes wide. You knew about this, she whispered. Brandon ignored her. I built this company, he said to Claire, fists clenched. I made Shaw Advanced from nothing. Something like sadness flickered in her expression. Did you? She asked quietly. Tessa's brows pulled together. What does that mean? It means, Claire said, that there's a difference between driving a car and paving the road. She picked up the gold pen, turning it between her fingers. Every time an anonymous angel investor rescued your payroll, she said, that was me. Every time a regulator decided to give you one more chance, That was a call from someone whose family name opens doors. Every office lease you thought you negotiated down yourself was pre-discounted because they wanted Caldwell goodwill down the line. Brandon felt the air squeeze out of his lungs. "You're lying," he said, but it was weak. She tilted her head. "You can ask Damien to show you the cap table," she said. Caldwell Strategic Ventures holds 61% of Shaw Advanced Dynamics voting stock. As chair of the trust, I called an emergency meeting at 5:30 this morning. She set the pen down and slid a document into view. "On the advice of counsel," she continued, "we voted to remove you as CEO for cause. The board accepted my recommendation unanimously." The words hit harder than any physical blow. "You can't just erase me," Brandon choked. "You can't just take everything." Claire's eyes finally softened, but not with the old warmth, with something like exhausted compassion. "Brandon," she said, "you're not being erased. You're being set back to where you started." Behind him, Tessa made a strangled sound. "Wait," she said. "So, you're the reason he even—" Claire didn't look at her. "This isn't about you, Ms. Lane," she said, perfectly polite. "It feels a little about me," Tessa muttered under her breath, but she shut up when Brandon shot her a look. Claire folded her hands. "You told me last night," she went on. "Take what you came with. You were very clear that you didn't want me to loot the place." Brandon's cheeks burned. Hearing his own cruelty repeated back in her level tone made it sound worse than he remembered. "So I've honored that," Claire said. "You will keep what you arrived with, Brandon. Your name, whatever cash you have that wasn't commingled with company funds, and a check I left in the mailbox for $200,000. Tessa blinked. $200,000 is nothing to you," she said to Brandon. Almost accusing. "It's an insult," he snarled. Claire's mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "That's what you told me my support was worth," she said. "So I thought I'd return the gesture." He slammed a fist against the panel. "Claire, please," he said, desperation shredding his pride. "This is you're upset. You're being emotional. Just come back. We can spin this. We'll say it was a misunderstanding, a publicity stunt, whatever you want. I'll cut Tessa off. Wow," Tessa hissed. "Rude? I'll do therapy. I'll sign anything," he rushed on. "Just don't burn it all down." Her gaze cooled again. "You lit the match," she said. A low murmur rippled through the people in the conference room behind her, but no one interrupted. "You wanted a clean break," she said. "I'm giving you one." She glanced at someone off screen, then back into the camera. "You have 1 hour," she said. "After that, the security system will refresh, and anyone not on the authorization list will be removed as a trespasser." 1 hour, Brandon echoed. "To retrieve whatever you brought into this life yourself," Claire clarified. "Clothes, mementos, anything not attached to Caldwell land or Caldwell capital." She paused. "And Brandon," he swallowed. "What? This isn't spite," she said quietly. "This is consequence." For a heartbeat, the driveway felt like a church. Then the feed cut. The panels went black. The only sounds were the soft whir of the tow truck winch and the distant rush of cars on the highway far below. Tessa exhaled sharply, dragging her hand through her hair. "This is insane," she said. "Like soap opera insane." "You didn't tell me she was a freaking Caldwell, Brandon." "I didn't know," he said numbly. His phone buzzed again, a flood of notifications. His inbox exploded. Board meeting minutes, official removal notices, temporary restraining orders on certain accounts. His social feeds were a firestorm. Headlines multiplied. Tech darling dethroned by secret heiress wife. Who is Claire Caldwell? The woman behind Shaw Advanced Fortune. Divorce drama rocks pre-IPO unicorn. Tessa's phone buzzed too. Her expression shifted while she read. "Oh," she said flatly. "Oh no, what?" he snapped. She showed him the screen. Her agent, "Stay away from that mess, brands won't touch it. Distance yourself now." Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She chewed her lip, thinking, then looked up at him. "You're broke?" she asked, the word unfamiliar in her mouth. He flinched. "I'm not broke. This is a setback. I'll fight it. I'll get everything back in court. I just need time, and a new legal team, and money." She cut in. He stared at her. She shrugged, unapologetic. "Lawyers like that don't work for free." The corporate recovery truck began hauling the first car away. The yellow sports car rolled out of the garage onto the wet driveway, helpless and gleaming, before being winched onto the flatbed. "Don't let them take it," he whispered. They're already taking it, Tessa said, and my name is in 3 of those headlines. So I'm not going to stand here and let my brand tank with yours. His vision sharpened. You're serious, he said. She glanced back at the house, at the life she'd been halfway moved into. Then she slid her phone into her bag, squared her shoulders and nodded. Look, you're fun, she said, not unkindly. But I worked too hard to wind up as the gold digger who bet on the wrong guy. You bet on me, he said, voice low. And it turns out, she replied, the real house always wins. She turned and started down the driveway, heels clicking. Tessa, he shouted, you can't just... She looked back once, walking backward for a few steps. Call me when you've got a place that can't be yanked out from under you in an hour, she said. And when your ex isn't the person who actually owns the ground you're standing on. She pivoted and left, shrinking toward the gate. The recovery agent checked his watch. 53 minutes, Mr. Shaw, he said. Brandon stood there for a moment, robe soaked at the hem, bare feet leaving prints on the stone. Then he turned and bolted inside. He tore through rooms that had once felt endless, arms loaded with whatever he could grab. Watches, a few framed photos, clothes yanked from hangers. He tried the wall safe in his study. The code didn't work. He tried again. The keypad flashed red. Access denied. Claire, he whispered, realizing she'd already changed it. He moved faster, adrenaline masking the ache in his chest. At some point, he became aware of a dull ache in his right hand from punching the panel outside. At some point, he realized he was sweating, breath ragged. He made one last dash into the mudroom, grabbed a duffel he'd used for the gym, and stuffed in shoes. Then the house lights dimmed. A synthesized voice came over the internal speaker system. Security refresh in 5 minutes. Unauthorized occupants will be removed. Removed. Not asked to leave, removed. He slowed at the front door and turned. The house loomed above him, all angular glass and stone and steel. He had loved this place. Not because it was beautiful, because it had been proof that he'd climbed out of the life he was born into, proof that he'd never have to return. He stepped out, duffel strap biting into his shoulder. Behind him, the door closed with a soft, final click. He tried the handle on instinct. It didn't budge. He walked down the stone steps to the end of the driveway. The air felt thinner down here. He checked the mailbox. Inside, as promised, was a plain envelope. No logo. He tore it open and stared at the check. $200,000. Objectively, a lot of money. Subjectively, for a man whose net worth had once fluctuated in billions on trading screens. Almost nothing. A tip. A mercy. An insult. He shoved it into his pocket. By the time he reached the main gate, the security cameras had pivoted away from him, lenses indifferent. He turned for one last look at the house. Through the high windows, he could see silhouettes moving. Different staff, different security. Claire's world now fully. Maybe it always had been. He walked away. The lift he'd reluctantly ordered rolled up to the curb a few minutes later. The driver glanced at the duffel, the robe, the bare feet, then at the mansion behind him. You moving out? He asked, half joking. Brandon swallowed. Something like that, he said. He slid into the back seat, clutching the bag like a lifeline. As they wound down the hill, the house disappeared from view. His phone vibrated with one last alert. Damien again, he opened it. Also, got a call from Caldwell Counsel. If you try to contest aggressively, they'll open a full forensic audit. If there's anything messy in the books, clean it up now. He stared at the message until the words blurred. Messy in the books. There was. Of course there was. Corner cutting, he told himself he would fix once the IPO goes through. Money shifted between accounts when cash flow was tight. Creative definitions of personal expenses on company cards. He closed his eyes. As the car merged onto the freeway, the bay sliding by to his right, the first real sliver of fear slipped past the anger. Not fear of being poor. He'd been poor before, fear of being revealed. Hours later, Brandon sat on the edge of a sagging bed in a motel off Highway 101, staring at walls painted a color that had once been white. The room smelled faintly of bleach and something older that bleach couldn't touch. His duffel lay open on the floor, its contents spilling onto the stained carpet. The TV in the corner played a muted segment about his fall from grace. His own face flashed on the screen beside Claire's. In her segment, the chyron read, Caldwell Air takes control, pledges to restore integrity. He muted it entirely. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Yeah, Mr. Shaw," a male voice said. "This is Leonard Ortiz. I'm a criminal defense attorney. My firm monitors significant financial cases. I've been reading about your situation." "I'm not under criminal investigation," Brandon snapped. "Not yet," Leonard said calmly. "But if your ex-wife's team follows through on that audit, there are going to be questions about how certain assets were purchased. If any of that involves misused funds, you'll want representation." Brandon swallowed. "What do you want?" he asked. Leonard named a retainer that made Brandon's throat close. "I don't have that liquid," Brandon said. "Then I suggest you find someone who does," Leonard replied. "Before your past finds you." The line went dead. Brandon stared at the dark TV screen, his own reflection faint in it. He thought about Claire in that conference room, steady and composed, pressing signatures onto documents that had rearranged his entire universe before he even woke up. He thought about all the times she'd stayed up late with him, brewing coffee, rubbing his shoulders, whispering, "You're going to make it." Had she already known back then that she was the safety net? Had she already set the traps in case he decided she was expendable? His jaw clenched. This couldn't be the end. He refused to be a man whose story ended in a room that smelled like mold and air freshener. He needed leverage. Something that proved Claire wasn't as clean as she looked. Something that forced her to bargain. His mind flicked to the guest house, smaller, older, tucked at the edge of the property. He hardly ever used it. That had always been her space, her retreat when the main house got too loud with his parties and investors and noise. He remembered walking in once and seeing a small wall safe behind a framed painting. He'd joked about secrets. She'd closed the painting quickly. "What's in there?" he'd asked. "Just history," she'd said. "You wouldn't be interested. History." Old families kept records. Records meant power. Maybe that safe held something he could use. Some document, some connection, some vulnerability. He checked the time. If the security overhaul had been as comprehensive as she'd implied, the main house would be impossible now, but the guest house. He pictured the old lock on the service roadside door, the one that stuck every winter. The spot in the fence near the ravine that had buckled in a windstorm and never quite gotten fixed. She'd always told him to repair it. He'd always said later. He stood up slowly. Later had finally come. He pulled on jeans and a t-shirt from the duffel, shoving the motel key into his pocket. If he could get back onto that property, into that safe, and out with something big enough, he might not get the mansion back. He might not get the company, but he might get a bargaining chip. And in Brandon Shaw's world, leverage was oxygen. Without it, he'd suffocate. He opened the motel door to the damp coastal night. The air smelled like wet asphalt and sea salt. He stepped out, pulled the door shut behind him, and walked toward the bus stop at the edge of the parking lot. Mind racing ahead to dark trees, broken fences, and a guest house full of secrets. The night Brandon went back, he didn't bring pride with him. He brought desperation. A borrowed hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low, and a cheap set of lockpicks he'd watched 2 hours of tutorials to master made him feel less like a fallen CEO and more like a man playing pretend in a life he no longer understood. But the fear in his chest was real, because for the first time, he wasn't fighting competitors. He was fighting the woman who had lived beside him, watched him, learned him, and, apparently, built a safety net he never noticed until it snapped tight around his throat. The rideshare dropped him a mile away from the estate. Brandon didn't want a GPS breadcrumb pointing straight to the gates. He walked the rest of the way, cutting through dark brush and slick dirt, shoes sinking into mud that didn't care what his name used to mean. The hillside was quiet. Too quiet. The Shaw estate, no, the Caldwell parcel, sat above the trees like a sleeping animal. Brandon crouched near the ravine where the fence had been compromised months ago. He'd ignored Claire every time she told him to fix it. Later, he'd said. Later was here, and he was thankful for his own laziness. He found the gap, squeezed through, and the instant his feet hit the manicured grass, his body tensed as if the ground itself recognized him as an intruder. He waited, listened. No alarms, no floodlights, no shouting guards. He let out the smallest breath, then moved low and fast, keeping to the tree line until the guest house came into view. It was smaller than the main structure, Stone walls, warm wood trim, a place that looked like peace. Claire's place. He remembered her retreating there when he hosted important people. He used to call it her little book hut with a laugh. Like her need for quiet was a cute hobby instead of a necessity for survival. The side door was just as he remembered. Old hardware, physical lock, no fingerprint pad. He inserted the pick with shaking hands. The first minute was nothing but failure. Metal scraping, his breath too loud in his ears, his pulse thundering like it had a microphone. Then a soft click. He froze, waiting for sirens that didn't come. He eased the door open and slipped inside. The guest house smelled like lavender and paper, and something else, something that made him angrier because it triggered memory. Comfort. He shut the door behind him, keeping the light off, using only the dim glow of the city reflected through the windows. He moved carefully through the room. A sofa with a folded throw blanket. A reading chair angled toward a small fireplace. Stacks of books that weren't decorative. They were lived in. And on the far wall, exactly where he remembered, a framed painting of a coastline. Brandon stepped closer, fingers trembling as he lifted the frame off its hook. Behind it, a wall safe. "Got you?" he whispered. He stared at the keypad. He didn't know the code, but Claire wasn't a complicated person. She was sentimental, grounded. Her idea of secure was never about being unbreakable. It was about being unseen. He tried the first code that came to mind, the date they met. Nothing. He tried their anniversary. Nothing. He swallowed, panic rising. Then he remembered something she'd said once, years ago, when he'd forgotten her birthday and tried to make it up with a watch. "You don't need to buy me time," she'd said softly. "Just remember where I started. Where I started." He typed the date she'd once told him she started over in California. A green light blinked. The safe clicked open. Brandon's breath caught. He pulled the door wide and shone his phone flashlight inside. He expected jewelry, documents, a secret stash of cash, something old money and dramatic. Instead, there was a single thick binder. Black leather labeled neatly in silver lettering. Project Shaw, he frowned. Then he flipped it open. The first page wasn't a deed. It wasn't a confession. It was a log. Clean, dated entries, like a medical chart, like a plan. Brandon read the first line and felt his throat tighten. 2018-3-4. Brandon is terrified payroll will bounce. He won't ask for help. Route funds through an anonymous seed grant. Make sure it looks like his pitch won it. His eyes flicked to the next entry. 2019-8-17. Investor meeting went poorly. Brandon is blaming himself. Arrange introduction through Whitaker Network. Keep Brandon's ego intact. His fingers turn pages faster. Psychers turn pages faster. 2020-11-2. Brandon's legal exposure increasing. Quietly retain counsel to protect him. Do not tell him. He needs to believe he's in control. Brandon's mouth went dry. He sat down hard on the floor, binder open across his knees like a verdict. Page after page, every miracle he'd bragged about. Every lucky break, every time the world had been in his favor. It wasn't luck. It was Claire. Not just loving him, engineering him, protecting him, making sure his success felt earned because she understood how fragile he was when he didn't feel powerful. And the worst part, the most unbearable part, was the tone. It wasn't cold, it wasn't manipulative. It was tender, as if these were the notes of someone nursing a wounded animal back to health. He smiled tonight. He thinks he did it alone, let him. Brandon's eyes blurred. He blinked hard, furious at his own weakness. He flipped farther. There it was, the mansion, 2022-214. Brandon wants the Hill property. Too large, too exposed. But he needs a monument. Use ground lease structure. Keep land in trust. If he ever tries to discard me like an accessory, the land returns to where it belongs. Brandon's chest squeezed so tight it hurt. He'd called her small. He'd called her boring. He'd thrown her into the rain. And all this time she'd been holding him up with both hands while pretending she wasn't. A sound came from behind him. A soft, controlled clap. 1, 2, 3. Brandon's head snapped up. In the doorway stood Claire. Not in a boardroom suit this time. Not in a cardigan. She wore a deep green dress that made her look like old wealth and new power at the same time. Hair pinned back, face calm. Behind her were two security guards, broad-shouldered and silent. And beside them, Grant Whitaker, the same name from the notice. The same voice she'd called in the rain. Brandon lurched to his feet. Binder clutched to his chest like a shield. Claire, he choked. It's a compelling read, she said, voice steady. Isn't it? Why, he blurted, rage and confusion twisting together. Why would you do all of this? Why wouldn't you tell me? Claire took a step inside. The guards stayed at the threshold, not moving, but their presence filled the room. Because I wanted a husband, she said quietly. Not a man who loved my last name more than my first. Brandon shook his head hard. I didn't even know. Claire's eyes held his. And yet you still threw me out, she said, with divorce papers in your hand, like I was an employee you were downsizing. His grip on the binder tightened. You were planning this. No, she said. I was preparing. There's a difference. Grant's voice cut in, polite as a blade. Mr. Shaw, you breached private property and access to secured safe. There are cameras in this guest house. Brandon's face twisted. Cameras, Claire nodded once. Thermal perimeter, motion sensors, silent alerts. The quiet wife learned to be thorough. Brandon lifted the binder. This is proof. Of what? Claire asked. That you controlled me, he snapped. That you manufactured my life. That you used me like a project. Claire's gaze didn't flinch. I supported you, she corrected. You begged for a life that made you feel safe. You just didn't want to see the hands holding it up. Brandon's voice cracked. If I release this, people will know you. They'll know I believed in you, she said almost sadly. They'll know I loved you enough to let you take credit. That's not the scandal you think it is. His eyes darted, searching for an angle that would save him. And then, like a drowning man grabbing a rope, he found one. He lifted his chin. You don't want this public. Claire tilted her head. Try me. Brandon's breathing turned harsh. If I go to the press, if I tell them you set traps, you mean the clause you signed? Grant said, stepping forward slightly. The clause your attorneys had access to during closing. Brandon's jaw clenched. Claire watched him, and the silence stretched until his threat sounded childish even to his own ears. Then she spoke, softly, dangerous. There's something you should understand, Brandon, she said. This isn't about embarrassment anymore. Brandon swallowed. What are you talking about? Grant reached into a slim folder and pulled out documents. He didn't throw them. He presented them like evidence. The forensic audit began the night you put me in the rain, Claire said. I didn't start it because I wanted revenge. I started it because I needed the truth. Brandon's stomach dropped. Grant's voice was calm. The audit identified misclassification of personal expenses, commingling of funds, and irregular transfers from accounts designated for employee benefits. Brandon took a step back, shaking his head. No, Claire's eyes sharpened. Yes, Brandon's voice rose. That's not what it looks like. It was temporary. It was cash flow. I was going to fix it after the IPO. Claire's expression hardened. You were stealing, she said simply. The word landed like a slap. Brandon's face went pale. You can't prove. Grant nodded toward the doorway. One guard stepped forward holding a phone. On the screen, a live view from outside. 2 county police cruisers, lights off but parked at the edge of the service road. Brandon froze. Claire's voice stayed even. Breaking into this guest house wasn't the smartest choice. It accelerated the timeline. Brandon's mouth opened, but no words came out. Grant spoke again, as if reading from a checklist. Mr. Shaw, you are being charged with trespass and unlawful entry tonight. Separate financial charges will be pursued based on the audit findings. Brandon's eyes flared. You're doing this to me. Claire took a step closer, close enough that Brandon could see the faint sheen in her eyes. Emotion held back with discipline, not absence. No, she said quietly. You did this to you. I just stopped catching you before you fell. Brandon looked down at the binder in his hand. For the first time, he saw it for what it was, not a weapon. A love letter disguised as logistics. A record of devotion he'd never deserved. His voice dropped to a broken whisper. I can change. Claire's gaze softened for a heartbeat. Then it settled into something final. You had years, she said. You had every chance. You didn't change until you lost the stage. Brandon's lips trembled. Claire, please. She didn't step back. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, hand it over. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he extended the binder. Claire took it like it weighed nothing. She walked to the fireplace. The same kind of fireplace Brandon had stood beside when he served her divorce papers like a trophy. Claire opened the binder one last time. Her thumb brushed an early page. Not because she missed him, because she was letting go of the version of herself that had been willing to disappear so he could shine. Brandon's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Claire didn't answer. She dropped the binder into the fireplace. Grant struck a match and tossed it after. Flames caught quickly, licking the edges of paper, devouring dates, entries, secrets, and sacrifices. Brandon lunged forward instinctively. The guards grabbed. He struggled, but it was useless. "Stop," he shouted, voice cracking. Those are the receipts of my silence," Claire said softly, watching the pages curl and blacken. "And I'm done being quiet." Brandon thrashed harder. "You can't burn it." "That's my proof? My." Claire finally looked at him again, and the calm in her face was colder than anger. "You don't get to own my love as leverage," she said. Outside, a car door closed. Footsteps approached. Then 2 police officers entered, posture firm, faces professional. One spoke. "Brandon Shaw." Brandon's breathing went wild. "This is a mistake. I live here." Claire's voice was quiet. "You don't." The officer nodded once, as if he'd already been briefed. "Sir, turn around. Hands behind your back." Brandon's eyes locked on Claire's. "You're really doing this?" Claire didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, "because you don't get to hurt people and call it ambition." The handcuffs clicked. That sound was different from divorce papers. Not soft, not symbolic, real. They escorted Brandon out. He twisted his head back as they led him through the guest house doorway, as if one last look could convince her to stop. Claire didn't move. The fire crackled behind her. Grant stood beside her, hands folded, patient, when Brandon's voice echoed from outside, angry pleading, then fading into the night. Claire exhaled slowly, not with relief, with release. Grant spoke softly. "Are you okay?" Claire stared into the fire. "No," she said, "but I will be." The next weeks moved fast, too fast for Brandon. Headlines shifted from scandal to investigation, then from investigation to indictment. The same networks that had once begged Brandon for interviews now replayed footage of him being escorted from a courthouse in a suit that didn't fit the way his old ones did. Tessa posted a tearful, carefully lit video about not knowing and being misled, then turned off comments when the public didn't buy it. And Claire walked back into the company like a storm that didn't need thunder to be feared. She restructured the board. She stabilized payroll. She restored funds. She called employees into town halls and told them the truth, that success built on rot always collapses, and that the people who do real work deserve better than a man who treats them like stepping stones. One evening, months later, Claire stood alone on a balcony in downtown San Francisco, looking at the city lights. Grant approached quietly. "The divorce decree is finalized." Claire nodded once. "Reduced sentencing in exchange for restitution and cooperation." Claire didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply looked out at the city and said, "I hope he learns what he refused to learn with me." Grant hesitated. "And the land? The estate?" Claire took a breath. "The estate isn't a trophy," she said. "It's just land." She turned slightly, eyes reflecting the lights. "But what happened there," she added, "was a reminder." "A reminder of what?" Claire's voice stayed calm. "That anyone can be replaced," she said. "But character can't be faked forever." She looked toward the camera in her mind. The invisible audience that always exists in these moments. The one that needs to hear the point, not just the drama. "And if someone ever tries to make you feel small," she said softly, "don't prove them wrong with noise." She paused. "Prove them wrong with the truth." If you watched all the way to the end, comment where you're watching from, city and state or country. And if you want a brand new story with an even sharper twist, just type "next story."